Welcome to the Cloud Pod, where the forecast is always cloudy. We talk weekly about all things AWS, Google, and Azure. We are your hosts,
Justin,
Jonathan,
and Peter. Episode 25, recorded on May 28th. Optimize your journey with the Cloud Pod Center of Excellence. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Cloud Pod. How's it going, Jonathan?
It's great, Justin. How you doing?
Doing quite well. We are still without Peter this week, so we have invited another fantastic guest, Elise Carmichael. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name's Elise. I live in Florida, and just to, tell your listeners about myself, I'm an engineer by trade, and used to work with both of you guys. Maybe that was 4 or 5 years ago. So I was a technical lead and ran this new hire boot camp there of freshly minted testers and developers. And then I took over QA and engineering for the company. And now I work at a company called Tricentis, where I'm the VP of Enterprise Evangelism. And actually, Tricentis was the vendor of testing tools. That's how I know of them. So that's me.
Oh, fantastic. So is that sort of like a dev rel job per se, or is it something slightly different?
What I do is pretty different. I work with sales and marketing to help with our messaging for our customers, help them figure out what the business value is of our products and help our sales team understand that as well.
Well, very good. Well, we're happy to have you here. You are our first female guest, which we are super excited about. So that's always a plus as well. It's been a lot of males through the podcast, which we acknowledge. So it's always good to diversify.
Happy to help with the quota.
I appreciate that. All right, well, let's get to the new news. So the first one up for this week for AWS, they've updated their pricing model for AWS config rules to a new pay-per-use model. So this is 84 predefined rules that exist in AWS config, and effective on August 1st, 2019, you'll now be charged on the number of rule evaluations you run each month. So if you run 100,000 in rule evaluations, you only pay a tenth of a penny per evaluation, or if you have a larger volume of that, 500,000 or above, you can pay as little as 5/100ths of a penny.
I can hear you doing the maths in your head right now.
Yeah, exactly.
5.
Carry the 2, move the decimal point. But yeah, so anyways, you will continue to pay additional costs such as S3, SNS, or Lambda invocation costs associated to your checks. But this is overall a really nice change. If you were to compare it to the old pricing model, which was basically on active config rules, they are costed between $2 and $1 per rule. Per region per month, and then you also had a invocation charge to it as well. So net, this ends up being a pretty nice reduction in your fees if you're a big user of AWS config.
We are not, sadly.
I don't know how many actually are, but overall, I think it's always good to be more secure, and these are great things that you can do to help move your business forward. If you have not checked out config, I definitely recommend it. Or there are some nice open source tools from people like Capital One with the Cloud Custodian product that do similar things, but this is a nice tool.
Presumably it's a cost saving for everybody, otherwise they would have marketed it as, hey, this is a reduction in cost. One of their many price reductions. So I guess there's some heavy users that they wanted to pay a little extra with this.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that the bigger issue was the old model penalized you for having more and more rules, even though they may not need to run that often. Where this now gives you kind of a better model of the rules only going to run, maybe once a day, but it has a large impact to your business versus, you only pay for that one invocation time versus paying for it for every region you want to have it in.
Yeah, it's really cool. I hope this kind of model actually spreads to other areas as well, like the private certificates and KMS keys and things, which you also pay, $1 or more per month for, even if you never use it. So that'd be kind of neat.
All right, well, Google has said that some of their G Suite passwords were stored in plain text since 2005. Google claims this is a small number of its enterprise customers mistakenly had their passwords stored in this method. Passwords are typically hashed or scrambled using a hashing algorithm to prevent them from being read by humans. And G Suite admins apparently in some use cases were able to manually upload, set, and recover new user passwords for company users, which then were being stored unencrypted on Google servers, which I think is the root cause of this issue. Google has removed the feature and has resolved the security issue, and the customers who were impacted by this have now been notified, and you have hopefully changed your passwords.
Yikes. Yeah, well, at least everyone's data has already been stolen, so what's the worst that could happen if it gets stolen again? No, Target. I think everyone forgot about the Target incident and the Equifax incident. Actually, I got an email, or actually a snail mail this week that said all of my data from Georgia Tech was stolen. Yet I did not go to Georgia Tech. I never applied to Georgia Tech, but they had my data and it was stolen.
Well, hey, on the bright side, if somebody got a degree at Georgia Tech and they're working, then they may well be paying for your Social Security in the future. So
Nice. Well, actually, I had this happen once to me at a previous job, which shall remain nameless. We had an on-premise solution, and I didn't realize everything was in clear text until we turned it into a cloud solution. So we were able to like reuse the same code, which was great. But I poked my my head into the production database one time and saw everyone's passwords. So don't do that, Google.
Definitely don't do that. Yeah, no, I think I got nailed by finally the Home Depot breach impacted me. I've been impacted by a couple breaches prior to that. And you kind of like, well, I changed the password for that and I'm good now, right? But then if you're reusing your password because you had to have a complex password, you would end up basically having that password now exposed on all those sites, and people just start brute forcing that stuff, which is really unfortunate. So definitely, if you haven't done those type of things, move to a password vaulting solution like 1Password or LastPass, and try to use a different password for all your services, and that's a good protection for these type of things, because I think we're going to continue to see hacking and data leakage as a big problem for the next several years while companies get better at this.
Well, Google announced their cloud data loss prevention tools at Next, so you kind of wonder, are they running this internally? Is this how they discovered the plaintext passwords?
It's very possible that's how they did, exactly.
Very well timed.
Maybe there'll be a good use case story on that next year about how we used our own tool to detect we had made a mistake.
Yeah,
maybe.
That's a silver lining.
Google Cloud had a good blog post this last week around the Cloud Center of Excellence, and Amazon popularized the idea of the Cloud Center of Excellence, and I hadn't really heard Azure or Google really talk about this before, and so I wanted to highlight this one because they did talk about it. They have a little bit of a different bend in a couple ways, but they say the Cloud COE can really help accelerate cloud adoption benefits in a number of ways, including driving momentum across the organization, developing reusable frameworks, managing cloud knowledge sharing, overseeing cloud usage, and aligning cloud offerings to the larger organization. And they've wrapped this all up in a really nice white paper. The Amazon version is a little bit different. It's a lot more around cultural change and cloud native architecture and some things that were not quite as highlighted in the Google version, which I thought was interesting. But net, I think if you're in this cloud migration journey, you should check out both the Amazon Cloud Adoption Framework and the Migration Factory stuff, as well as Google CCOE. There's a lot of really great tech content here, and I just wanted to highlight this here in the podcast this week.
Yeah, I'm usually a little bit against CCOEs or just COEs in general, but I've found that with all these bigger enterprise customers that I've been working with lately, they kind of need them. And in fact, with this one in particular, my company Tricentis has implemented something almost identical to this, not called a CCOE, but having a group dedicated towards our cloud strategy. We're actually two companies that merged about 6 months ago, and so one of the main products is cloud-based on AWS. Another one is kind of this big on-premise behemoth of an application that we're putting in the cloud or pieces of it in the cloud, but what cloud and how has been kind of a struggle. So this is something that we have kind of one team working on how we're doing it as an entire organization, so it's worked out pretty well.
You think the CCOE is kind of doing for modern developments and users of the cloud what ITIL tried to do years ago, but kind of died out?
That's an interesting perspective. I think this is just really about typically cloud migration, right? Where I would think the ITIL foundation and what you're trying to do in ITIL is more general, ongoing best practices and things like that. The CCOE, as they describe it in both Amazon and Google, is something that you do during migration, and then it kind of changes into what I would consider a platform shared services team or a cloud platform team. But the COE as a concept, I agree with at least prior to really the cloud COE. COE was a 3-letter word or 4-letter word that I didn't want to talk about because it was always a lot of people doing a lot of nothing that didn't really had a lot of value, and so that was a tough scenario.
It's always tough when people focus on a particular tool as well, and then that tool becomes the solution to everything. And it's kind of a worry with a cloud center of excellence that the solution will always then be, it's got to be a cloud-based solution. It may not always be the case.
Yeah, no, I love putting as much as we can in the cloud, but I agree it's not always it's not always the right solution. I like desktop applications. I think they're still important, and it's nice when everything can run locally sometimes.
Yeah, talk to an accountant about running Google Sheets versus Excel and how much they enjoy web-enabled Excel applications versus Google Sheets.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazon RDS for Microsoft SQL Server has increased the database limit per database instance up to 100 now. So it used to be 30. And so for those who are not familiar with SQL Server, the basic concept is that you have a SQL Server instance, which is all of the main underpinnings of SQL Server, the temp space, the disk allocation, the memory footprint, the CPU, scheduler, all that kind of a SQL Server. And then you could have instances inside of that, and those are considered databases in the SQL world. They're considered schemas in Oracle and MySQL and others. But those databases, you basically only you'd be capped up to a 30, and then if you went over 30, you wouldn't be supported in RDS anymore. And so by now moving this up to 100, you actually get a lot more density on a single RDS instance, and you can actually handle a lot more customers if you're doing shared tenancy, which would be every customer has their own schema, but they're in a shared database server. And that's really what this really helps with power. And this is a huge savings for a lot of companies, particularly in Microsoft licensing costs. As you pay on the physical CPU, typically for Microsoft licensing.
I suppose this is pretty interesting. This doesn't really affect us. We do all of our Microsoft stuff on Azure.
So interesting. Why would you choose to do Azure for your SQL stuff versus Amazon, or is there just because that's where you typically do all your .NET application development? What's your multi-cloud strategy around that?
Yeah, well, so like I said, we had these two companies that merged. One of them was completely Azure, and the other one was completely AWS. And the Azure one was a complete .NET product. The other one's, an Angular web, Java, Node type setup. So it just kind of happened that way. So going forward, we'll probably keep them separate in the near term, but I'll have to ask that the CCOE.
Interesting. Yeah, it's typically you see your scenario quite often where you have a multi-cloud strategy because of acquisitions. They were on Azure, you were on Google or Amazon, and that's kind of where you kind of stay before you consolidate them up or keep them separate. But what do you think about the workload of multi-cloud where you actually take a workload and say put it into a container and then run it across multiple clouds as one big global application? Have you ever seen that or done that before?
We do something kind of similar. So one of our products is called Flood.io, and it lets you do load testing. So cloud-based load testing, and we'll distribute it for you, but you basically pick a cloud platform, so you can use any of the big three, and it'll distribute it. So the product works with all of them, but I believe it's hosted on AWS itself.
Yeah, so that's a very common scenario I've seen too, where yes, it can support those things, but you typically will run it on one or the other. But a really truly distributed application across multiple cloud vendors, which is what I consider to be the holy grail of what people talk about in the multi-cloud space. I just haven't really seen it in the real world, so I was curious if customers or people are doing it, and I'd love to talk to a real one who's really doing it, because I think the complexities would kill it very quickly, but it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I've never seen one. Just all the disaster recovery and backups and everything just seem easier to do it just in one spot.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, if you can run something multi-cloud so easily because the application you built supports that, then surely you could equally just spin it up in a different cloud on demand when you need to. So you could always kind of pick the best price or the one closest to your customers. What's the real benefit of running in many clouds at the same time if it's not being closer to the customer?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest advantage you get is either data sovereignty, where you can put a data center into some place like Jakarta that has legal reasons to do so, or it's closer to your end users in a country where Amazon or Azure or Google doesn't have a data center, but the other provider does. I see that being a value. But this dream of I can arbitrage EC2 costs across the different providers, and because of spot instance pricing on Google today is less than it is on Amazon, I'm going to move my entire workload there today because I'm getting the best bang for my buck. It's so much complexity and so much work. I don't see it.
I've never encountered any of our customers who do that with the same product.
Yeah. I mean, but that's when you talk about people who are advocating, avoiding vendor lock-in and avoiding all these things and really trying to push this multi-cloud strategy, that's what they're trying to sell you at some level. And so that's always where I was like, I don't know where the rubber meets the road on those type of pitches, because I've never seen it either. And I don't so much complexity in data and state and where do you store state, and there's a lot of gravity in different platforms. All right. Well, let's move on to Amazon has now allowed you to Enable default encryption for new EBS volumes. This is an opt-in feature that you can enable for your account. This allows you to basically, any EBS volume will have a default key assigned to it, either the Amazon pre-built key, or if you're using Cloudwatch SIM or KMS to do your own keys per account or per service, it'll create those and you can make that a default key. You can override that at progression to choose a different key, so you don't have to use the default, but you can't disable encryption once you've set this flag. So we'll have to have at least one of the choices of keys, but you can change it if you need to at boot time. So overall, this is a really nice improvement for any new. It will not encrypt existing EBS volumes.
So why would this be an opt-in kind of option if it's about encryption?
There are some limitations why this is probably not on by default for everybody yet, is that you can't launch some of the legacy server instance types, the C1s, the M1s, the M2s, or the T1s with these newly encrypted EBS volumes, because they don't support them. And so if you have those in your account, you'll no longer be able to launch those types of services.
That's weird how they wouldn't support them. I figured that would be something that happened at the hypervisor layer. So does this mean that's an old hypervisor that supports those instances versus the new Nitro system or something else? It still gets exposed to the OS as unencrypted data. So I was convinced that Amazon were actually encrypting all those volumes behind the scenes anyway. So this kind of suggests that they weren't. I mean, it would have been easy for them because they use envelope encryption for everything to encrypt stuff without even telling you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's evolutionary thing, and it may be that in a year from now they say all new default accounts will have this enabled. But anything you can do to keep your customers from shooting themselves in the foot, I think, is a good idea too, because they've had enough scenarios where buckets were open to the public and then sensitive data got out of the system. So. Hey, I'm going to pause right here because my dog just walked in. I'm back. Sorry. Amazon Ground Station has GA'd and now is available for you to use if you have satellites in space. The onboarding takes a few days, though, so if you have a need to use the satellite system, you'll need to have your NORAD ID, your FCC license, and several things, fill out a form, and they will contact you within 24 to 48 hours, get you set up. You select the ground station you would like to use to talk to your satellite, depending on the path of your satellite takes. And so a few clicks of the button, and you can now start downloading data as soon as the satellite crosses over your location. So really nice for those companies who have satellites in orbit that they need to talk to on a regular basis. And a lot of companies already have this infrastructure, of course, if they have satellites, but options now to start moving away from owning your own ground station infrastructure could save some companies a lot of money, and I get why Amazon's doing this.
I think this is pretty exciting. Granted, I don't have any professional reason to use it, but I would play with this, except for it's a little pricey just to play with. It'd be neat if we could talk to the new satellites that were just launched by SpaceX last Thursday.
Yeah, the Starlink, the 60 satellites they launched into space, pretty
yeah.
Great. Yeah, but the pricing is a little bit expensive. So they have reserved and on-demand per minute pricing for this. So narrowband reserved is about $3 per minute, and wideband reserved is $10 per minute. If you want to do it on demand because you don't have a very large need for it, narrowband costs you $10 per minute and wideband costs you $22. Now, putting that in perspective of those satellites that launched in space, I don't think the $3 to $10 per minute of price to talk to them is really your biggest cost concern.
Yeah, but they should give me a free tier, I think, just to play.
Is this just downlinks or is this like uplink as well? I'm kind of unclear on exactly what this service is actually offering. I mean, it kind of looks like you tell it what to tune into and when to tune into it and what to record, and it kind of records it. But like, is it bidirectional?
I believe it is bidirectional, but again, I'm not a satellite person, and I don't know how that all works. But I believe it is bidirectional. But the scenarios that are in the blog post that we're linking to here from Jeff Barr are from like national weather data satellites and stuff like that, which have a very much, they're just downloading data to the ground. They're not really getting signals to change their software or anything like that from the system. So
yeah, I'm gonna have to have a play around with this. I'm a fan of Raspberry Pi and the software-defined radio stuff. Lots of fun little projects like airplane tracking and the weather radar stuff's a big thing as well too. So yeah, this is really cool.
Yeah, no, it's very awesome for companies that have to do this thing. I know one company that has something very similar to this, and they have billions of dollars of investment in ground station equipment, and that's a big cost to maintain that equipment. So I totally understand why being able to use this as a shared service versus running your own satellite dishes on the ground to talk to satellites makes sense. So
this is a Jedi-related project.
Maybe. Very, very interesting. Yeah, especially since the first two regions that opened are both U.S. centric regions.
Yeah.
They do say it's coming to other global regions in the future, but the first two are Virginia and Oregon. So yeah, it might be very much Jedi related.
Hey everyone, Jonathan here. I just wanted to take a minute to thank the cloud consulting gurus at Foghorn for helping make the CloudPod possible. These folks truly get it. Cloud consulting experts since 2008, they are premier tier partners with AWS, Google Cloud Platform Silver, and Microsoft Azure partners. From multi-cloud to containers to moving full production workloads to the cloud under the tightest compliance, Foghorn's team of full-stack cloud engineers have been there, done that, gotten the t-shirt, and are ready to share their experience with you. If you're in the market for some talent to supplement your team, visit www.fogops.io/thecloudpod. www.fogops.io/thecloudpod. Foghorn, the promise of cloud delivered.
So Firecracker, which they shipped at Amazon reInvent in November, has published an open source update for May, which is about 6 months since it was open source at reInvent. They were talking about they've had 87 merge commits from 30 plus external contributors into the master branch, which represents 24% of all commits in that time span. So pretty awesome. They've done a ton of additional investment into what's in Firecracker since it was launched, including support for Virtuo spec compliance, multiple CPUs, CPUs without 1 gigabit, huge page support, memory model improvements, and more. There's been over 450 forks out there, people tinkering with the code, and there's been several open source projects even that have started to integrate with the Firecracker product, including Kata containers, Unix, and OSV. And Intel's new recently announced Cloud Hypervisor also leverages code from Firecracker and more. So overall, they have several things still planned for 2019, including AMD support, ARM CPU support for Jonathan, VSOC, and several defense in-depth improvements, including ease of use for those who are using it. So overall, a really nice set of improvements to Firecracker. Exciting to see what they're doing with micro VMs and a bunch of different use cases that these things are starting to open up in the market. I hope for some really great talks at reInvent this year to talk about what people are doing out there in production.
I'm excited to see what people are doing here too. I do, my company does a lot of stuff with software testing and test automation, and we have a lot of customers that do some sort of automation with like open source tools, and so they always have this issue where they're trying to figure out how to get enough test machines to run everything in parallel. And I imagine there'll be a pretty interesting use case here to kind of set up some small instances to run them instead of containers, because containers have different problems that we encounter in testing.
Kubernetes has released on GCP Marketplace application management operators. So these are a new set of Kubernetes operators that you can buy from the GCP Marketplace or basically add to your deployment. These are basically designed to help companies leverage open source containers and apps and special interest organizations to be able to publish these. It includes a standard API for creating, viewing, and managing applications in Kubernetes. And the one example that really kind of resonated to me, because it's been a problem I've seen, is the new Java operator that they've developed. And JVM's used over 15 billion devices and software packages out there. And JVM as a solution on virtualization works really well, but in a container, it can't really detect a lot of the things it needs to understand for its operating environment, right? So you do a limitation on container can only use 4 gigs of memory, but the JVM doesn't see 4 gigs of memory. It sees all the memory, and then it tries to allocate itself dynamically, and then ends up being killed by the Docker host. So this is a nice Java operator that basically lives inside of the setup and basically dynamically understands the Docker space and the Kubernetes space and what's been configured, and then make sure the JVM fits properly into the system, honors the isolation mechanisms, etc. So I see the value of these type of things. This is actually a really nice thing that I'd like to see end up in other Docker type solutions out there like ECS or AKS, etc.
I'm actually wondering how many people, who use Kubernetes use Google versus AWS and Azure. I think we have a lot of customers that use Kubernetes, but they're not generally on Google.
I think Kubernetes has taken over the world, right? I think the question, I would imagine that almost any customer who's using Kubernetes is either using it on Amazon predominantly or Azure because they're number 1 and 2.
Right.
Google is number 3, of course, and so anybody who's using Google is probably using their Kubernetes service. But the big thing is that how many of the companies are using the native Kubernetes support in the platforms, right? So are they using something like Minikube to deploy their Kubernetes cluster on AWS, or are they actually using Amazon EKS? I think that's the question, really. I think there's a ton of people using Amazon and Azure for Kubernetes. So I think they're doing it with homegrown or pre-built components from the open source Kubernetes projects that make it easy for them. Very few, I think, are actually necessarily using the pre-built AKS or EKS services to help you do it.
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
This big thing about Google is if you really need Kubernetes and you really want machine learning and big data, it's a really great cloud for you. But everything else kind of is a little bit behind.
That's kind of weird to me. Like VMs were a logical progression from bare metal, and then you have Docker, which is lightweight virtualization. It seems like a weird kind of hack to have these operators to help you orchestrate the applications that you deploy in a container in a way. It seems like it highlights like things that could be better with the platform.
Well, I definitely think there are things that you would want the platform to eventually provide, but in all the prioritizations of what Kubernetes has, why wouldn't you want to just take this fork from Google where they've developed it for you, then just integrate it into Kubernetes open source versus wait for Kubernetes to develop it themselves? I guess it's a question, because it's all open source software at the end of the day. So what's it matter if it's available to you from Google or it's available to you in the native open source, as long as it's available to you in some method? My argument was so compelling, I silenced you.
No, I just only explain what I meant, really. I mean, like, it seems like they're building these tools to make up for the fact that the platform they're providing is not as native for the applications as you would like.
Well, is it? I guess, this is the question of sandboxing and jailing and all that kind of stuff on Linux for a long time, right? Like, this Docker just took Linux core capabilities and then packaged it into an easy way to use it. And then Kubernetes took that and basically turned it into something that you could scale massively as a scheduler unit, which was based off Borg. Maybe it's something that Borg already did, but they just didn't put it into the open source. I don't know. If you want to follow up on that one next week, I'll let you bring that.
I'm not going to use it either way, so that's fine.
All right, fine. Amazon RDS for SQL Server now supports always-on availability groups for SQL Server 2017. Always-on availability groups, of course, allow you to improve the availability and durability of SQL Server deployments by automatically replicating databases between two AWS availability zones when you choose multi-AZ. This is now supported also for SQL 2016. It's been that for a little while, but 2017, this is new. If you are using either 2016 or 2017 in the old mirroring method and you want to use this, you have to disable multi-AZ mode and go to single zone, and then go back to multi-AZ, and you'll get the new version of this through that process. So overall, this is a really nice improvement. Always on is a superior solution to mirroring in a lot of ways for many companies.
Do we get multi-master with always on, or is that a separate thing?
No, SQL doesn't really have a solution for multi-master unless you go to sharding.
That's cheating.
Indeed. And it's also very complex.
Yeah.
GitHub has launched sponsors, which lets you pay for your favorite open source contributions. So this is a new tool called Sponsors that allows you to add a button to donate to the project, or Sponsor Me button. This is somewhat controversial among open source developers who don't really want financial interest to influence what people will work on. But overall, I think this is a really nice improvement for open source and open source development. And if you can throw some money to the OpenSSL guys, I think that's always a big win. GitHub, I have a quote here from them. Today, GitHub sponsors will be launching in beta to get ahead of such concerns, GitHub told me when I asked for comments. Through this beta, we're actively listening to how folks are using the new program. We want to better understand how the program evolves and how we can best scale the framework of the program to enable opportunities for everyone to participate in and build on open source, which was their response to open source developers being concerned about people only working on stuff that gets paid for.
I think this is awesome. I absolutely love this. So thank you, GitHub, for making this path. I think this is a lot better than what's out there now, which is a company just picks a product that they use and like and pay developers to work on it. So you already have that kind of sense of sponsorship, so to speak. But also, like, if you go to some open source project that's pretty big, there's probably some home documentation page with one of those old, like, PayPal donate funds to me button, and they're still out there all over the place. And I think this is a much nicer solution than that old style, donate to me button.
It'd be interesting if they take a cut of the sponsorship money, because where PayPal, you're not paying a fee if you're a commercialized entity in any way. I don't know about the open source, but typically there's fees associated with those type of transactions. So I'd be curious to see if sponsors doesn't have that issue, or what the cut is to GitHub. But yeah, I think it's a nice improvement.
Well, they need money from somewhere now. Didn't they just make private repos free?
They did for up to 3 people, right?
Yeah, just small group.
This is just Microsoft poking the Amazon bear for all the bad things they're doing to the open source world.
They definitely hold a little bit like that, like, oh, well, if you're going to attack open source, we're going to help them out. And their answer is, we'll let you give them money. It's great.
Yeah.
But I look at it purely on the Heartbleed disaster that happened, and OpenSSL and this bug, and you find out it's 2 guys or 1 guy working on OpenSSL, and you're like, this thing is used by so many companies, and it would be great if you have value to this product that you can have an easy way to sponsor them. So I think it's a nice improvement. It's something the community maybe needed, and we'll see how it plays out over time, and if the naysayers are right or not. But I'm excited about it.
Yeah. Do you think they'd ever do this for Azure DevOps repos? I know they're doing a lot of the same features on both products.
Yeah, I mean, it's unclear to me how Azure DevOps is going to either be consumed by or consume GitHub, because it's definitely the path it seems like they're going in. But what that looks like yet, I don't think anyone's really explained to the market yet.
Yeah, I can't tell.
I mean, on one side, I think they'd be foolish to kill the GitHub brand. But my expectation is that we'll continue to see GitHub become more like Azure DevOps as it continues to evolve.
Yeah.
You can now manage your cross-cloud spend using Azure's cost management solution. Azure Cost Management allows you to now look at your AWS spend and eventually your Google spend. Costs can be analyzed across 18 different dimensions like provider, service name, usage locations, AZ, meter, and tagging. Budget alerts can be set up for both Azure and AWS spend, and additional cost management features will be coming out over the next several months, which we'll keep you updated on.
He laughs.
I mean, what better way to get insight into your competitors than asking your clients to share your bills with them?
Well, that was my take. I was like, if I'm a Microsoft salesperson, I'm salivating at the idea of, oh, you're going to have all the Amazon cost data, so I can see if they're spending, $20 million on Amazon and only spending $1 million on Azure. I can now I know exactly which accounts I need to go farm to grow my revenue target. So yeah, it's a little interesting on that side of it. But I mean, I also see this being a big threat to people like Cloud Health or Cloudability, who one of their big plays is if you're multi-cloud, they're one of the only players who allows you to see across all your cloud providers. But now if this becomes something native into the cost management tooling of Azure or Amazon in the future, maybe GCP, that's a big risk to those businesses.
Yeah, I guess this is the optimist in me thinking, oh, this seems nice. It seems really convenient.
I mean, if you were going to go multi-cloud and those 2 clouds were Azure and AWS, then this might be good for the finance people or anybody really. But
well, I definitely know if I was multi-cloud and I was doing both of those 2, that I would look at Azure's cost management tooling before I looked at AWS's. So
they have a tool.
Exactly. Oh. All right. Well, that's it for new news this week. Jonathan, you're on the hook for the lightning round again because Peter's not here.
Should have got him to record it and just send us the quotes in.
Future plans.
Future plans. Well, this is where Polly can come in the future, I think, reading the lightning round for us.
There you go.
Elise, are you familiar with the rules of the lightning round?
I'm not, and I'm a little nervous because I don't know what a lot of these things are that I think you're going to talk about.
That's fine, nor do we.
Okay.
So these are the news items of the week which didn't make the cut for talking about in person or in detail.
Unworthy, but still somewhat interesting to probably someone in our audience who would like to know that this existed, because one of the big challenges in any of these cloud providers is trying to keep up with them in any serious way is a full-time job, and so we're trying to help out all of our listeners with that use case. But we can't talk about everything because this would be a 5-hour podcast if we did.
And there's definitely a lot of press releases where they're just trying to keep the name in the headlines, and so yeah, we filter out the junk for you. And this is the lightning round, so I will read the title of a press release or a news article which we're not going to talk in detail about, and we can make fun of it, we can say something interesting, whatever the case may be. And at the end of the lightning round, I will pick the comment or the rebuttal which I thought was the funniest or best or whatever. It's at my discretion. Those are the rules.
Oh boy. Okay.
AWS now allows you to enable Hibernations on EC2 instances at the same time as you launch the AMI.
I'm speechless of how excited I am about this.
Yay.
You're literally going to sleep.
I'm literally going to go hibernate about this right now.
Amazon Document DB with MongoDB compatibility is now SOC 1, 2, and 3 compliant.
I love that every time they use the word DocumentDB, they put in parentheses with MongoDB compatibility. Just to keep you, anytime you're Google searching for MongoDB, you're going to come up with this particular product from Amazon as well, which is the most obnoxious thing they could possibly be doing to a MongoDB right now.
Elise?
I gotta say something. No,
Oh, you don't have to say something. I just want to make sure
I
you
was
get a
still
chance.
trying to figure out what SOC 3 compliant was because I just don't even know.
Oh, so SOC 3 is basically that you can put a logo on your webpage, if I remember correctly. It's kind of the dumb SOC. SOC 1 is
SOC.
that SOC 1 is that I have these controls, and the control could be as bad as I store all my data in plain text, and as long as you have that as the result of your control, then technically you could be SOC 1. SOC 2 is typically where they have a bunch of like standards and guidelines and things that you actually have to do to be SOC 2 compliant. And so that's really the more valuable of the compliance types.
Those I know. So 3 is the gold star.
Yeah, basically. And SOC 1 also is really important, I believe, from I'm not a CFO, but I believe if you are dependent on a SaaS service for your financials, like Workday or SAP or something like that, you need them to be SOC 1 so you can certify that the books are accurate, if I recall correctly. So There's a lot of nuance here, and I'm sure someone's going to write in and tell me, like, well, SOC 3 is actually this other thing. But in the world of IT, where we really typically worry about SOC 1 and SOC 2. SOC 3 is a bonus.
1 SOC, 2 SOC, red SOC, blue SOC. SOC 3 doesn't go into it. AWS Marketplace enables long-term contracts for AMI products.
Continuing to allow those legacy business models to thrive.
Yeah, but who would want to do this? Like, why would you sign up for a 3-year contract on something when you can pay weekly? It seems like a...
For discounts, Jonathan. It's all about the discounts. I'm committing to you. I'm going to run this Django Marketplace app for 3 years. What discount can you give me? And they're like, we'll give it to you for half off. And I'm like, I'm in. And it's done.
So
It's that easy.
I'd buy it.
AWS budgets now support variable budget targets for cost and usage budgets.
So finally, all the people who are super excited in February when their bill is reduced by 2% because of 2 less days in the month, the new budgeting feature can now fix that problem for you.
Oh, that's too bad.
They've exceeded their budget for the word budget for the rest of the show.
Budget.
Amazon RDS recommendations provide best practice guidance for Amazon Aurora.
Yay.
Yeah.
I mean, the recommendation engine, I guess, should really know how Aurora works and should be able to tell me what the right way to run it is. I also would hope that Amazon would just do it for me, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
I mean, I don't know exactly what this is, but it seems by definition that's what it does.
Yeah. There's a recommendation engine in RDS that tells you things to do to your database and like maybe resize it. I would expect it to do that for Aurora, so it's just a little silly.
Yes, use more RDS. I think I'm channeling Peter now. All US Azure regions now approved for FedRAMP high impact level.
Where's my checklist for Jedi? Check.
They got a lot of regions too, don't they?
They have a lot of regions.
Yeah.
Yes.
AWS Backup now supports AWS CloudFormation.
So I was sort of excited because I was like, oh, finally I can back up my CloudFormation with AWS Backup. But it's actually the opposite way around. You can write CloudFormation code to set up AWS Backup, and I was immediately less excited.
I thought the same thing just now, and now I'm disappointed. I went through a whole cycle very quickly.
7 stages of grief.
Yeah.
I think this is because of all the bad feedback about CloudFormation, about how they're so slow with rolling out support for new features. Now that they're twisting the press releases around, so it looks like it's the other guy's fault. It's the AWS backup team's fault they didn't have CloudFormation support.
I will take AWS backups for CloudFormation, though. If there's a product manager listening to our podcast, I gladly welcome that feature.
Seconded.
AWS step functions add support for callback patterns in workflows.
I love callbacks.
If I'm going to write a programming language, it seems like a pretty obvious feature. so much better than polling.
Yeah, callbacks are the best.
Yeah, this is a really cool feature, and I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a GitHub repo that explains all how to use this. Amazon API Gateway now supports tag-based access control and tags on additional resources.
Oh, I'm sure you're in love with this one, Jonathan.
I just wish they'd either not done it or just have a press release to say, hey, we're changing our messaging around tags, or we need to repurpose tags to do this other cool thing because we couldn't figure out how to do it any other way.
There's some other tag stuff that came after the cutoff for the list of things that we talk about in this week's show. But I was talking on Slack to some people about this, and I was like, the problem is the more you put security into the tagging, the less ability for a developer you want to give them to modify the tags. And so you end up in this situation where you now have tagging is supposed to be this great thing to identify workloads and cost management and potentially mark servers as sensitive or not sensitive or PI, whatever. And then now the issue is I can't do that because if I have access to the tag, I can actually change the security permissions of what I'm doing, which is a terrible scenario. So I'm fascinated. We'll talk about it more next week, but it's just, I agree with you. This is such a terrible choice.
Maybe they should add something called like an ID or something that is not the word tag.
Yeah.
Leave tags as tags.
Or you have to kind of segment tagging, right? Like, does tags become, these are security tags that are not changeable by people, and these are tags that are changeable by users, right? But right now, I don't believe you have that level of granularity.
Well, Amazon does, because there's some kind of concept of namespace in tags where you AWS colon and then the name is reserved. We can't create those ourselves. So if they could implement some kind of namespace controls in the IAM policies for tagging, that'd be great, because then you let users create their own tags and security team create their own tags, and cost tags should probably be fairly protected as well. Otherwise, you change the tag and somebody else gets the bill. So yeah, but there's no history of tags. There's no, if there was a history, that'd be one thing, because you could audit the history if a tag had been changed. So maybe they need more tags. That's obviously what we need. More tags. We need write once tags. We need sign tags. We need everything.
No.
More tags.
No. Don't do that. Don't do that.
AWS Code Commit now supports including application code when creating a repository with AWS CloudFormation.
Well, I mean, I don't even know how this pattern works, but I guess if you want to have your application code tied specifically to a CloudFormation and you want to have that tight coupling of infrastructure as code and application code, this is one way to solve that problem.
All the bad things you could do with this.
Yep.
Yeah, this seems like a really strange thing to do. I can't picture a use case where you do that instead of keeping it separate and just pull the code onto the machine. Or
well, it's not like they don't have code commit, which stores the code, and then you use code build to build the binary. The binary you put into S3. Like, why do I need this extra step where I'm actually going to put the code into the repo with the CloudFormation? It makes no sense.
This is so people can host the websites from code commit and things like that, with crazy things like that. How do you even do that, though? I mean, CloudFormation is a zip file you upload, either at deploy time or you have to put it in S3 someplace else. So
is the use case maybe Lambda? Because with Lambda functions, you want to deploy them with CloudFormation, but the way you had to do that weird sideload with Lambda was funky, and so this is a solution to that problem? No, I don't know.
But you can provide a zip with the content you want added to the newly created code commit repository, such as README or sample code. How many people create repos programmatically? I mean, I guess at the start of a project, you may want to create repos programmatically, but it seems weird. It seems weird to be a deploy time.
You say that, and I remember specifically with Elise that we had a tool that would create a Jira project and a GitHub repo programmatically.
But it was just for a new project.
It was
like Jonathan just said.
So we could deploy a CloudFormation template for every new project. Cloudwatch Logs add support for percentiles in metrics filters.
I am so happy about this at the 99th.
Seems like a good feature. It
was only in probably a million customers' contracts about how they measure uptime SLA or any throughput. It's always at a percentile. So the fact that it didn't exist for the 8 years that CloudWatch has existed is sort of funny.
Amazon DynamoDB adaptive capacity is now instant.
Which is what I thought adaptive capacity meant.
Is it even adaptive though now? It's not really adaptive if it's instant. It's instant capacity.
Well, it only instantly provides you the adaptive amount of capacity you need.
That's what I wanted all along.
Of course. Why not?
Amazon Connect decreases US telephony pricing by 26% in the US East and US West regions.
Great.
I mean, yes. If I'm wanted to make telephone calls with my Amazon account, I guess that's great. I mean, this is the first telco price cut they've ever done, though. All their telco prices are still stayed the same, but telephony giving you a price cut.
You can't forget that businesses still pay a lot of money for phone calls, whereas most consumers either pay a flat rate or zero.
Oh, I'm very familiar how much money you can spend on Twilio.
AWS Transfer for SFTP now supports AWS CloudFormation and host key import.
So the host key import is a nice move because that was a bit of a problem if you wanted to just kind of seamlessly move off your old EC2 based SFTP host to this new service. You couldn't do that because people would notice because the host key changed. But now you can spoof it, and so you just violate a bunch of security, but it works perfect.
That is cool. Amazon RDS for SQL Server now supports SQL Server Audit.
That's actually nice. I didn't realize it didn't support this, but for companies that are HIPAA compliant or something like that, the ability to audit who's accessing specific tables in your database is a huge feature, which is really beneficial, which might have prevented some companies from using RDS for SQL Server, actually. So this is actually a really great feature for companies that have that audit requirement.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is going to affect a lot of people.
And finally, Azure NetApp Files is now generally available.
Yay! You can run your legacy NetApp equipment in your Azure account. Fantastic.
And that is the end of the lightning round. Let me aggregate the scores.
Did you take notes this week?
No.
I don't know what you're aggregating then, but fantastic.
I'm buying thinking time.
I like that Jedi quote. It's twofer. Justin talked about Jedis twice.
I did, but that doesn't mean I should get it.
Was it in a lightning round?
Well, there was, because we talked about Azure regions now support FedRAMP High, and I said, check the list for Jedi, check the box.
Well, yes, okay. That's pretty reasonable. We could deem that the winner. Do you
Actually, I really liked Elisa's conversation on SOC 1, 2, and 3. I think you should give it to her for that.
I like the Gold Star sock.
Yeah, the Gold Star SOC.
Which I know I'm going to have to go research.
Well, if you learn that I'm completely wrong, which is very highly possible I am, please do send follow-up email to me, and I will make sure we cover that next week while you're off world traveling.
Yeah, well, I've gone through multiple SOC 1s and 2s, and it's like a bad word now, and I didn't even know there was a 3.
Oh, I can give you much, much worse than SOC. SOC is the easy one.
That's fair.
Compared to some of the other compliance things I've had to do.
I'm going to give it to the Jedi.
Nice.
My lead in this is getting to be pretty formidable.
Well, about that. So I think we should have an end. We should actually have a winner at the end of a quarter or at the end of some kind of period of time, and then start back at zero again.
Well, if you do get this poly thing, you could definitely have Peter back in the competition too.
Maybe.
Well, thanks again for pitching in on the lightning round as usual, Jonathan. Let's also move on to your cool tool segment.
We don't have a cool tool as such today, but we do have with us Elise Carmichael, VP of Enterprise Evangelism with Tricentis, a provider of innovative automated software testing tools.
Yeah, so I work at Tricentis, so let me tell you a little bit about our company. Generally, we help customers transform their quality and automation practices by having a suite of tools spanning from things like test case management and test automation to load testing. We do test data creation and obfuscation. We do data warehouse and BI testing. And we also have a really robust RPA tool, robotic process automation, and service virtualization that I mentioned earlier. And our whole goal as a company to help mitigate risk in your products and generally repeatable processes. So in doing that, we provide visibility into the state of quality across the organization in a one-stop shop. So that's kind of what my company does. We have tons of tools, with our two most popular ones being Tricentis Qtest and Tricentis Tosca, which is a really great automation tool that works, great for end-to-end testing. Its, specialty is testing applications like SAP or web or mobile or a lot of the legacy on-premise applications and things like that. So that's a little bit about my company and some things we do in testing.
The automated continuous testing, how do you kind of get started with that if you're not doing, is this a lead off of TDD, or is this a lead, something else you kind of need to think about as you design software applications? How do you, because I've heard continuous testing and it's really interesting to me, but so I haven't done it and I haven't written code in a while. How do I get there? What's my evolution look like?
Yeah, so the idea with continuous testing is really testing across the full life cycle of the product. So we even have a TDD, BDD type of tool that you would use, say, in Jira. So all the way from as left as you can go when you're writing out the requirements, you can test there. And we support a lot of open source tools. So you would use something like Cucumber. That's by far the most popular, left side of the testing spectrum. And then kind of on the right side, you'll have something like Tricentis Tosca, where you do end-to-end testing. So with some of our other tools, like our orchestrated service virtualization, you can kind of have a stable end-to-end testing environment, which is really hard to create. And so, at the end of your cycle before you release and all of your products are ready to test. So say you're testing like a mobile app, which talks to services, which talks to some point of sale thing and some, on some Windows box somewhere, and you want to test the entire cycle, but you don't want to manually test it anymore. You can use a tool like Tosca. And then we also have a bunch of accelerators for really common application packages, like a bunch of the SAP tools. You can just kind of use these, what we call accelerators, and get ready to test it without having to write any code. So that is pretty handy.
So does this kind of eliminate the need to have many, many big environments stood up for people to test against?
A little bit. Yeah, so we handle all the distributed test executions with Tosca. So you do have to set up a machine to run the tests. And unfortunately, a lot of these tests have to be run with an actual GUI in place. You have to have, a proper machine set up with your execution agents. But we handle all of that stuff for you. But we also do things like load testing and distributed load testing. So that's another thing that's kind of a pain in the neck to scale on your own. And there's a lot of tools that do it for you, like JMeter's one of the most popular ones, but it's really kind of a pain in the neck to scale JMeter as far as it needs to go. So we've kind of solved that by scaling in the cloud for you.
Can you take JMeter code and import it into your Flood product?
You absolutely can. So there's a couple ways you can use Flood. So one is just JMeter. You can just upload it, import it directly, and run it right away, and it'll spin up as many, we call them nodes, as you need. So as many, it actually runs in Docker, so you can spin up as many Docker containers, or it will spin them up as you need them in any cloud environment. You can also do it in your own environment if you don't want to use our cloud. But you can also do something that's kind of neat with our load testing tool. We actually made an open source application called Flood Element, and it's basically a wrapper on top of Selenium. So you can basically drive a browser through this tool and say, run it in Flood, and it will scale running it from the browser's perspective in the cloud. So, we'll see problems like, through the web server, you're making too many API calls and you don't even realize it until you run it at scale. So it's kind of neat to find real world problems versus just hitting the APIs with something like JMeter.
That's really cool. Actually, this is a problem that I'm having right now, actually, where we have a performance testing team that does a great job and they're really good, but they sometimes just want to test, did this release reduce or improve our performance by some tolerable measure of percentage. And so right now the problem is that they're the JMeter experts and they know how it all works. And so if we had a simpler way to approach JMeter, we might be able to have our DevOps team do it, for example, or have our engineering team actually run it themselves, or type it right into our Jenkins pipeline and have Jenkins just do it for us.
Yeah.
So that's actually really kind of interesting. So that's something I'll check out in the future.
Actually, I just gave a short keynote at our conference in San Francisco last week about that tool and how you can actually record with one of our other tools called Qtest Explorer. You can record exactly what you want that workflow to be, say every sprint. And you don't have to know how to code, and you can directly drag and drop that Flood element script that got created for you into Flood and run a test and put it into your Jenkins build.
Interesting. I've seen similar things with other load testing tools where they do recording of your web browser session and then you can replay it. And so typically it gives you a nice scaffold to start with, but you have to then go tweak a ton of it. How is your tool different than something like some of those other types of tools that do that recording type thing?
So that is not the bread and butter of our tool. It's just kind of like a nice to have, but you can go in and take that code and edit it. It's really just a short Node.js Selenium script. Actually, it's TypeScript. But out of the box, it works pretty darn well. It mostly does click and waits, and then you can see the response time and everything of each API call that was made within Flood.
So then, I understand the agile dev testing for Qtest and the Tosca thing and Flood. How does the robotic process automation kind of play into that as well? What are you really doing there?
Yeah, so we really just announced that last week. So it's kind of a really hot topic in the market right now. There's a couple other companies that have gotten a lot of funding, and we're like, well, we already do this, and our customers already use Tosca for this kind of process automation. And one thing that we had going for us is we have 150 or so different tools that we support are ready with the testing tool. So things like Excel or just a terminal, all kinds of mainframes. And that's something we already have. So if you want to automate, logging into some email system, opening up Excel, pulling some data, putting it somewhere else in production in kind of like a really robust, resilient way, our tool already does that. So what we've done is just added kind of a nice UI layer to help you design your bots, which is what they're all called in RPA, to help you design your bots to say, this is the thing I want to happen, anytime, this event happens.
Are you trying really hard not to say if this then that?
If this then that. It's really hard. IFTTT.
Yep.
So does it work with any desktop client then? Like if I wanted to create an Excel file, type a bunch of data into Excel file, save it as a PDF or something, I could make it do that? Or is it is it specifically you have to like embed it into the code, and since you don't have Excel access,
it is a no-code solution. So you're not really writing anything, and you can put data into whatever you'd like, but it already works with all of those tools. And if it's like a custom-built tool, it works with things like Win32 applications or WPF. So it's these pre-built things and tools like SAP that are written in some other language and some other framework to like really common types of applications.
It's really awesome. We might have to be in touch.
Absolutely. You know where to find me.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this week. It's been a pleasure to have you as always. It's always good to talk to you. Where can they follow you on the internet if they want to follow your amazing insights?
Oh, that's a great question. You can always look me up on LinkedIn, Elise Carmichael. I'm on Twitter. My name is UNC Fleece, like UNCFLEECE.
Fantastic. Well, we will definitely have you on again sometime in the future if you're willing to come back for this fun. But definitely have a great week, and thank you for joining us here on the Cloud Pod.
Thanks, Elise.
Great. Thanks for having me.
And that is the Week in Cloud. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Foghorn Consulting. Subscribe today on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, and tweet us your feedback at #TheCloudPod.